I'll admit, I'm somewhat of a broken clock when it comes to games. A lot of games I play on a daily basis are one based around violence. Over the past few months, I've logged over 30 hours in Ultra Kill. I still log in regularly to do Destiny weekly resets, and some of my most played games that I've 100% are high action combat games. I'm borderline that one meme about not playing anything without a ball or a gun in it. This isn't to say enjoying games based around violence or action is bad. They still hold artistic relevance. I guarantee I'm playing more Ultra Kill or one of these other games as we speak. But sometimes the story needs to be told without destruction needed. Sometimes the path forward is about experience rather than destruction. Sometimes you need a savior. Welcome to Saviorless. Released April 2nd of 2024, Saviorless was marketed as one of Cuba's first video games to be available globally. However, research shows that this game was in development hell for almost 9 years, in a world that had mostly forgotten about it. It was brought to my attention when I got an announcement trailer for its release. The art style and animation were extremely well done, and I decided to wishlist it on Steam. Cuba isn't known for its game releases. I would dare say most Americans don't know it outside of a single historical event, and the fact its most famous leader was in COD. I'm certainly no expert, but I'll try my best throughout the video to bring light to a lot of the cultural pieces of this game. I will warn that a majority of the elements I will talk about in this game will be story rather than gameplay. So this will be more of a video discussing themes of this game rather than the general gameplay. Without further ado, let's plug in a controller and let's start a new save. We were dropped in to see an old man narrating a story to his niece and nephew. They are training to become a narrator, however they have some objection to the story their uncle is telling. For starters, he has told this story before several times. Listen, I've been accused of being a broken clock to media I enjoy, but sometimes you gotta keep your hyperfixations locked up. The other problem is that, apparently, he has not let the protagonists reach their goals. His excuse is that there would be no need for narrators if the story went exactly as it was written. He also uses this to point out that one narrator will not control several protagonists throughout the story. Not even a minute in, and we're getting a very meta-narrative dialogue for this story. Thankfully, this is where the actual story begins, as we play as Antar, a boy trying to reach a place known as the Smiling Islands, a place you can only reach by following the Radiant Heron. First thing of note is the presentation in this game. The entire thing is hand-drawn and animated in this unique style, and it keeps this consistent style throughout the entire game too, which leads to these beautiful landscapes. It also helps the levels remain varied as you progress. Every major stage has a unique vibe to it that makes the game feel almost like a picture book as the story progresses. The animations themselves are really impressive, giving a lot of weight to Antar's actions. It's very clear from the first few moments that Antar is not a necessarily strong protagonist. Where he falls from high enough points, he has a crouch animation that locks him in place. There's an overall vibrance to the motion between monsters, other characters, or even the environment. The game really captures the feeling of journeying to a weird and mysterious location. Something I will note is how it does kind of affect the hit registration in the game. There is a level of disconnect between when I land or mantle on something, like something is off. I think the main thing comes from the game having no transition and animation frames for mantling, as well as a lack of screen transition frames. So there's this slight underlying feeling of jank for animations the devs either didn't expect to use a lot, or they just never found a middle ground for. Despite this, visual presentation is well done. Where does that leave the audio? Surprisingly, the audio is very well mixed. There's a lot of audio directional cues that allow you to take in environmental information. Birds echo in caverns, water drips down, electricity whirs. A lot of stuff that makes these environments feel active. I'm not sure if there's a technical term for this, but oftentimes animation needs a sound to be associated with it. I don't really know how to give a good explanation of this outside of how Team 4 started Broly.
Princess Trunks!
Just having a form of association with how creatures move or objects function in a game is important to making the game feel more alive. It makes it feel as though the player has influence over the game environment with their actions. The music adds to this, soaring whenever you complete an action that progresses further into the stage. It really adds to the feeling of triumph when you progress further into a stage, letting you know you've made more progress. I've talked a lot about presentation, and that's mainly because there isn't a lot of gameplay to discuss. The game is a puzzle-based platformer, using very little button inputs on a controller. You interact with objects, with each stage having a different mechanic to interact with. It goes a long way to helping the stages feel diverse, but I do wish the gameplay was a bit more engaging. It really feels like the game doesn't utilize its potential from a gameplay front, with very little done to change up how you traverse stages. There's very little progression to filling out your tools to progress through levels. There's a narrative way to look at this, however it feels like there's more that could have been done with even just how you interact with the game world. Perhaps something to engage more with enemies would help the game a bit. Wait, that feels like something is being evoked. Not exactly what I was thinking of. We'll get more into context of that later, but even the combat is pretty simple. Thankfully, the game knows it and keeps it to very specific curated sections, preventing the game from turning into a mindless slog of what would amount to Minecraft slap fights. Like I said before, the hit registration can be kind of weird for gameplay, which includes combat. I think it's just a matter of the hitboxes not fully aligning with the animated attack. Definitely a little frustrating at times, with some later stage enemies having some very questionable hit registration. There's some really minor boss fights, but combat for the most part comes down to traversal rather than focus on combat. Like I said, more of a focus on traversal than slap fights. This game does have collectibles in the form of these map fragments. Zones are broken up into multiple sections marking how many map fragments you need to get. At the end of each stage, there's this guy, Dawson, who, if you have all the map fragments in the zone, will open this chest and give you a trinket. According to him, you will need to collect all of these to finish your story, apparently. Antar himself will comment on things from time to time, but we don't really get a solid feeling for his character. Outside of his determination to get to the islands, he generally will go in agreement with the player in terms of topics. In other words, he's basically a self-insert. However, it does seem like he's supposed to represent a concept rather than be his own character. The game boasts about 5 major stages, which can be broken up into several smaller stages. Overall, it's a pretty short runtime of about 4 hours, but that's in part due to the story. This is a game about telling a narrative after all, and we might as well get into the story. It's kind of hard not to discuss the game without going into the story. If you want to avoid spoilers, click off this video now and play the game. However, I would recommend you come back here after playing because its story is complicated. So where we left off, Antar is introduced to his journey to the Smiling Islands, following the Radiant Heron. Along the way, he begins encountering signs warning the area is only for hunters made by someone named Nento. Whoever he is, he clearly likes making copious amount of rules for you, like a Dark Souls player, needing to leave comments every step of the journey. Nento seems to lead a pack of hunters looking for the Smiling Islands, although he seems to be trying to breed herons till he gets the results he wants. He's in turn created this large mess of worm spawning grounds that is ravaging his encampments, and the hunters. Seems without any luck, Nento is likely dead. However, for the narrators of this story, they are once again getting tired of telling the story the same way. Tobias does explain that narrators are bound to one story forever, which explains why he's so obsessed on retelling the story in a loop. In turn, he explains that there will not be another story or protagonist. The pupils, tired of their uncle's Sisyphean task of retelling the same story, decide to interject with adding a new protagonist. Quite literally through Deus Ex Machina stronger than the Greeks, Nento is alive and his destruction continues. After slaughtering a large beast, he presumably alters the story, giving him access to the Smiling Islands in a way to end the story for good. It was presumably the inserts for Lennon and Rimbo arrive, to note that clearly they've let the story get out of hand, and as a result, Nento is off to cause more destruction. With both young narrators now inserted into the story, they begin guiding Antar through his journey to follow the Radiant Heron, as he dives deep to find out where to go to reach the Smiling Islands. In the depths, he encounters a very unfortunate looking symbol. This is Tella, who informs Antar that due to a shift in the islands, he needs a new savior to shift the narrative. In turn, we're put through this gorgeous cutscene that was actually used for the trailer of this game. It shows how the island is being ravaged, and then in turn Antar puts on a savior mask and gets powers? We haven't exactly been explained what a savior is. The name seems to imply it's a form of hero, or salvation. Seems our answers will be revealed on the Smiling Islands. Despite the name, there's nothing to smile at on these islands, just by looking at the enemies. 1. Time is thine enemy. 2. Thou shalt never look back. 3. Thou shalt destroy everything. 4. Thou shalt kill everything. Smile, for these islands bless death. Now, it may just be me, but I think the saviors might be the bad guys. And with that, we obtained the power of a savior. With that sign from before, we're able to gather the mechanics of being a savior. Your health and time left in the form are one and the same, and if you run out of time, you die. It's an interesting way to tie in the in-game story to the mechanics of the game. The saviors as we know them on the island are a cult following Nento who seek nothing but death and destruction. The island has been recontextualized to a place where only joy is slaughter. It's implied that this island has now shifted to this vision Nento has, as now the island is full of nothing but death and destruction. Nento has slaughtered any opposition in his way to stopping him from reaching the island, and in turn has formed an army of saviors to kill those who remain. He even manages to push out the narrator inserts, who are seeking themselves to become saviors. Turns out Tobias put them in the story as protagonists to try to prevent Nento's ascent to being a savior. Upon finally reaching Nento, we can finally show down before capturing us. With the help of a marmot from before and the intervention of the young narrators, we're able to escape and finish the job. However, we're interrupted by Tello again. They take us to the Red Fortress, where memories of a 2019 expansion haunt me, and where Tello reminds us that they need a protagonist to finish the story. In some ways, Tello could be a stand-in for Tobias, as they both focus on wanting Antar as the central protagonist. Additionally, it could be that Tobias has other plans than having Antar become a savior. However, there's a lot that contradicts this, as Tello seemingly wants an end to the story, while Tobias seems to perpetuate that Antar never finishes the journey. Perhaps Tello is nothing else, a personification of the story itself being told. Progressing through the Red Fortress, we encounter the corpse of the two narrator stand-ins. This is actually massive. During one of the previous Nento dream sequences, we encounter the two savior creatures that try to stop us. This puts those dreams into perspective. They're not dreams, they're visions. Similarly, that explains what happens to the marmot we encountered previously. That level was in the Silent Forest, and Nento started that level at low health. That means the marmot was the same one that saved Antar. Similarly, it means that the Red Fortress fight was killing both the young narrators. Nento has effectively killed everything in his way in order to get into the Red Fortress, and whatever of desire is at the center. It also means that when Tobias sent his nephew and niece into the story, they ended up in the past somewhere to help guide Antar. Or at least it seems that way. I see why most stories don't mess with time travel. Doesn't help that this is a meta-narrative. All that power, and you're still nothing but a retainer to Tobias. Whatever this is, it's Nento's endless drive for hunger, and this time, he's looking to finish off the last protagonist. After several Bell-related lobotomies to Nento, we reach the depths of the Red Fortress. What is truly down here? The true power of being a savior? Or something greater from the islands? Before we can learn the secrets of the place, we need to end Nento's rampage. With one final ringing of bells, Nento is slain, and we can progress into the deepest sanctum. Reaching this sanctum, Antar dons the savior form once more and chases off his past self, killing him for good. Reyes talks about this being the end of the story, and that we are being shown what we would be giving up if Antar became a savior, as we see him transform into a beast. The story is concluded, but nothing has been reached. Antar failed to overcome the violent nature of saviors in Nento, and just became a new beast that guards the Red Fortress. The base ending is kind of unsatisfying, implying Antar is doomed to become another worshipper of violence on the Smiling Islands. Regarding anything deeper that could be found here. However, what if you got all the trinkets throughout the stage? What changes in the ending? Antar proceeds down the left path instead, seeing his different forms follow behind him. As they begin to reach further down the path, the Radiant Heron begins killing off the other forms with its roar. First the beast, then the savior. However, Antar is left to pass, and after some time climbing, reaches the summit where he's taken to return to Tobias. Don't smile. Remember that one day the narrator who tells this story will also come to an end.
What the does that mean, Kobe Bryant?
Alright, I'm done with the obligatory YouTube plot summary video essay. From the research I could find, Savior takes from a lot of places. For starters, it naturally takes from aspects of Cuban culture and politics, but it also takes seemingly from its own development, as noted from this interview from around the time of its release. The game originally started under the name Savior, before shifting to Saviorless throughout its development. It seems it struggled with a lot of issues throughout development, starting with finding a publisher and moving to rolling power outages. Overall, there isn't a lot of information on the exact story of the game. The devs have been purposely vague as they want the audience to form their own takeaway, so I'll try to do my best with as much knowledge as I could find. To start, the final cutscene has some weird implications. Antar didn't ascend into the narrator pantheon. Presumably he returned to the story, his journey unfinished yet at the same time reaching a far better understanding of his desires. Tobias himself tells the audience not to smile. Smiling as an action in Saviorless has more of a direct connotation with violence. Sure, it can also be interpreted as joy, but it seems to imply taking pleasure in causing pains to others. In a sense, Tobias is giving a very existential message at the end, reminding us there is an end to everything. And that's okay. I think the takeaway of the meta-narrative of Saviorless is that as messy and changed as the journey can be, every story can come to a conclusion, even if it's different than when the writer started out. From the initial screenshots, it seems the concept of the narrators were there from the start. They each represent a different desire in terms of those experiencing a story. Tobias represents the narrator following tradition to a T. He refuses to adjust or adapt his story, and as a result, shifts in the narrative can cause drastic damage. His nephew and niece are storytellers eager to create change. They look to create a new telling to an old story, something that fits with their times. The problem this creates is that they create a protagonist without restrictions, and one that will blindly consume the story if not dealt with. Now for the meta-narrative. If the meta-narrative was about the practice of telling a story, from what I can gather, the story of Saviorless is about the pursuit of goals itself. Antar being a young boy is reflective of this. He is in an early development stage where obtainable goals are something he begins to want to chase. His quest to reach the Smiling Islands to become a savior is reflective of this. The very notion of becoming a savior is that of becoming a hero for others. In order to be a savior, there needs to be a relationship with someone else. The Smiling Islands themselves could be a representation of success or the very nature of reaching your goals. Following the Radiant Heron could just be metaphorical for following the path to said goal. The Heron can also be hard to follow, but determination will overcome that. The words that leave Nento in his perversion of the island's meaning. Well, given his introduction, it's likely he is someone who has gone about reaching his goals through violence. He has learned that in order to get what he wants, he must take it through violence and forceful means. In turn, he perverts the idea of what the islands are from success to being ruthless, killing anything in your way to reach your goals. And this perversion creates an island where death is rewarded and tearing down others is valued. So why a donkey? My best guess is the representation of a donkey being connected to Cuban labor and in turn, life. It could be he's supposed to represent society as a whole. That due to the competitiveness of invading forces, we are forced to be ruthless in order to retain our desires and in turn tear people down. All that leaves now is Telos, who as mentioned before seems to represent a desired end to the story. They could also be what remains of the original intentions of the island. After all, they have that same weird face that the smiling monsters have. They could have been what was originally supposed to be the island, and in turn chose Antar to be the savior of the story. Finally, we have the Red Fortress. What is conveyed heavily in this area is sacrifice. This can be noted in the fact that the two narrator children were effectively sacrificed to Nento to give Antar a chance to win. Similarly, the facility opens with Telos sacrificing themselves to enter. Lastly, we have Antar in the presumable true ending sacrificing his other forms in order to proceed to the narrative ending. There's also some amount of religious significance to the building with how much architecture looks like a place of worship. Perhaps this place is the pinnacle of the beliefs of the saviors, where their bloodshed is rewarded. To continue with the metaphor from before, if the island represents success, the fortress represents enshrinement, proof of what you've accomplished. Saviorless is a game with a very complicated narrative, and I don't claim to have the best understanding of it. It's confusing, vague, and follows two separate storylines at the same time. It was interesting to see a studio from a country not known for its game do a take on a short narrative game. For all its complications, I do think it was clear there's a lot of passion behind the development of this game. It's especially clear given the game's history being developed over the course of 9 years, that there was a desire to get this game out. I hope there are more Cuban-developed games like Saviorless that break through the indie game barrier into Western audiences. I'm interested to see what kind of creative talent comes from Cuba, although with the landscape right now, it's extremely difficult to break into, as stated by Saviorless' own director. If nothing else, I hope this video helps platform smaller games like it to be picked up by more people. This video is likely coming out a few weeks after Saviorless' 1-year anniversary, so unfortunately I'm a bit late in giving them a shout out before then. Regardless, it's an interesting piece of media from a relatively underreported country when it comes to game creation. Next video hopefully won't be as long to make. Burnout is real, and it can especially hit you when you're covering something outside your normal circle of interest. Twice as much when you screw up recording over half the footage. Don't worry, next video will be something I'm a bit more familiar with.